welcome back to Strayatrains. In this video we're going to take a look at the ins and the outs of the Flemington Racecourse Line. First up we'll start with an overview, and then we're going to take a look at the interesting way that this line operates, and finally a crazy story to conclude from the Connex days.
This is a service to
Strayatrains,
stopping all stations direct to
Strayatrains. So first a quick overview of the line. It is served by Metro's Comenge, Siemens and Extrapolis fleet, and has a total of 5 stations long, and 2 of them lie on the Flemington Racecourse Line only. It serves Melbourne's northern suburbs, and on the map it is actually given the special colour grey. However, on passenger information displays it's given the colour dark pink. Its line code is RCE, although I have seen FLM used, but I'm pretty sure it is just RCE for the most part. And the down service terminations are North Melbourne, Showgrounds and Flemington Racecourse. Now Showgrounds and Flemington Racecourse do make sense, however North Melbourne may have stood out to you as an interesting termination on the Flemington Racecourse Line. Well, each peak AM there is an 8:23am and 8:46am service that stops all stations from Flinders Street to North Melbourne. Then it runs from North Melbourne to Flemington Racecourse to side for the day before returning back to peak PM services. As you'll see here, Flemington Racecourse Station is actually used as a siding for Metro when they need to stable some trains, giving the line more of a purpose throughout the year, as generally speaking, only on select days during a calendar year will services actually run on the Flemington Racecourse Line. Now let's take a look at actual Flemington Racecourse services, and this line almost feels like it operates as 2 separate lines to an extent, as up Flemington Racecourse trains, when terminating at Southern Cross, take a different route to the city as opposed to up Flemington Racecourse services terminating at Flinders Street. First up, let's take a look at what happens when the train runs to Flinders Street. As you can see right here, the train is junctioning off the Craigieburn line tracks and getting ready to tackle the Essendon flyover and divert above the Werribee, Williamstown and Sunbury line tracks to then eventually connect to the Werribee and Williamstown tracks just before we hit North Melbourne. And this, in my opinion, is really one of the greatest parts of the network. You don't get on the Essendon flyover too often on an up service, and when you do, you get a really nice view of West Melbourne, including part of the city skyline and some of the stabling yards. So here we are, we've crossed the flyover now, and on the left of us is the Northern and Newport line tracks. Right ahead is Melbourne CBD and some stabling yards. And for some reason the train did come to a little bit of a stop, which gave plenty of time to admire the view. What happens afterwards, which we'll see in a moment, is the train then connects on to the Newport line tracks, which is platforms 5 at North Melbourne on the up, and then of course uses platform 6 when it's running down services. And then afterwards pretty much follows the typical up Werribee or Williamstown service. So that's platform 5 at North Melbourne, platform 13 at Southern Cross, and then Flemington Racecourse Line trains will either terminate at platform 8, 9 or 10 typically at Flinders Street Station as they get ready to then afterwards return back to Flemington Racecourse or Showgrounds Station. So in terms of service frequency, it really just depends on the size of the event. Services typically run between 10 and 45 minute frequencies, but of course for the bigger events you're looking at more 10 to 15 minute frequencies. Generally for big events, trains do terminate at Flinders Street and originate, whereas for smaller events, typically that's where the services terminate and originate from Southern Cross Station. And as promised, here is the junction on to the Werribee Williamstown line tracks, and North Melbourne Station is just ahead. One last thing to point out for Essendon flyover services is whenever that is the case on the down, and a train that is going to use the Essendon flyover will depart from North Melbourne Station, you'll actually see the letter K here at the signal pointing out that the train is heading towards Kensington. As typically, trains departing platform 6 at North Melbourne will depart towards Footscray. Flemington Racecourse services use Southern Cross platform 8 as the terminus, which this is the only exception that a Metro train would use this platform, as otherwise only V-Line services use platform 8 at Southern Cross Station. The train then makes its way through the V-Line yards area here, and then right afterwards connects to the Craigieburn line tracks, as those tracks are actually the closest tracks to platform 8 Southern Cross, as Northern Group services use platform 11 at Southern Cross, And then platforms 8 and 9 use the city loop, so there's no conflict of interest, which makes things really easy to connect over and generally quite smooth. So whoever thought of this idea, I think it's a really good idea, as previously Flemington Racecourse trains used to use the city loop, so the Southern Cross Terminus idea, in my opinion, is a really good one. But I'd love to hear what you think, because it is sometimes an inconvenience for those customers that Flinders Street would be a little bit more convenient for. And that wild story I promised, of course, goes back to the good old days of Connex, or maybe not so good. And that is in particular on Oaks Day of 2008, which saw roughly 90,000 patrons attend the event, and quite a number of them relying on the train back into the city from Flemington Racecourse Station. However, that afternoon, an overhead power failure occurred on the Craigieburn line near North Melbourne, suspending trains and therefore meaning Flemington Racecourse trains could also not run. As a result, with very little information, patrons were stuck for over 2 hours on the platforms, only to eventually be told that they would need to take a bus replacement back into the city. However, in remarkable scenes, some people actually walked on the tracks from Flemington Racecourse Station, sparking one of the most amazing photos personally I've ever seen, and I think something we'll never see again. Search it up on the internet if you do want to see it. I highly recommend doing it. Just search up something about Flemington Racecourse people walking on tracks or something, and it should come up. It is something remarkable and just seems so out of the ordinary. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Hope you learned a thing or two about the Flemington Racecourse line and service. And I think we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for watching, and cheers.